to a lot of caravans. Yeah, I get it. I absolutely get it. Like, if you haven't figured out what you need and what you want, probably the most common question we get: how do you plan a lap? And how do you buy a van? Or how do you choose a tow car? What if things go wrong? How do I prepare? Now, quite often people say, how do you buy a van first? Off-road, semi-off-road, tourer, water, solar, single axle, dual axle, mods, GVMs, GCMs. Sometimes people just have a bent about particular brands. Lemon car sites or the lemon caravan site. And there's so much conflicting advice. It just gets confusing. Because long before you buy a van, you've got to decide really what you want to do and what you like doing. Now, without labouring it, it actually becomes easier. G'day, we're David and Paula. After 40 years, we took a gap year from work, bought a van and did a lap right around Australia. And it was life-changing. So now we're trying to rebalance life, work, the van travel in Australia that we love, and still ticking off some overseas bucket list items. Hey, g'day, welcome back. Thanks to everybody who made comments and a contribution to the last couple of videos in this technical how to buy a van, how to plan a lap from scratch series. It's really appreciated. It's added, I think, to the corporate knowledge. This video, we've got a fair bit to get through. And in many respects, I think it starts to fall in place here. So we won't labour certain points. We'll get through the process. If you do like, or you're finding this useful, please like, subscribe, share the video. Remember, we're not professional YouTubers. 100% of our YouTube ad revenue does go to charity. So the next stage in the process is the rig down select. Now, I think several steps ago, this is a hard bit, this is a confusing bit, and where do I start? I actually think now, without labouring it, it actually becomes easier. You've already got a good feel now for what it is that you want to do with your rig, where your preferences sit, what the rig has to be able to achieve for you, and the options narrow down. So all we're going to talk about in this one is how do we actually test whether the narrower range of options we're now looking at work for us. Here's just an example of the considerations that we took when we first bought a van. But I'll add in, now that we're actually looking for a smaller hybrid, just a couple of extra factors, because you can sort of see how even our choices have refined over a few years. And the more comprehensive you can get this list now, before you've seriously looked at individual brands and vans and rigs and cars, the more likely you are to be able to now go and choose and down select with purpose. And remember, on some of those technical considerations, you can't fudge them. They either work or they don't work. If the weight doesn't work, there's nothing you can do in that rig that's going to actually make it a joyful experience or to work, unless you're going to do major modifications and those sorts of things. So things like the weights and the technical capabilities of the van and its ability to go to the places you need to go, some of those things just are what they are. And it doesn't matter that you like the colour of another van, right, or you like the shape or the comfort of the seats of another car. If that car can't tow that van, or if that van can't go to the places that you want it to go for the duration you want it to go, then the van doesn't work, or you're going to be taking some significant risks. This is where you look with purpose. And we selected 4 or 5 van options that suited those needs, and that's all we looked at from then. Now, here's your safety net. The safety net is if there's a van or if there's a car that's just sitting out there that you really like and it's really captured your heart and it's your passion project, by all means you can throw that back in. But just remember that if it didn't meet this shortlist in the first instance, then there's something that doesn't work about it, and you have to be able to live with that compromise, so that it might not do the job exactly the way that you want to do it. Go and select then the 4 or 5 vans. If they're caravans, just let's use that as the example. Now you can go and visit and look at those and talk to the salespeople and talk to the teams, on site. We'll go to the caravan shows with particular purpose and ask the right questions about what's the warranty if I take this van to these 4 or 5 locations. Are you going to 100% cover me? Does the van actually do that? I want to take it off grid for these number of days, and we're thinking that X amount of battery. Is that going to be doable in your van? So you can ask these quite specific questions. If you go into a caravan show, we didn't find it of any use to suddenly start deviating and sticking our head into other vans and confusing our heads. On cars, I think the cars become even easier, right? So let's set all the tribalism apart. There really are only a handful of tow rigs that are generally capable of towing, the range of vans that we've been talking about in this series. And they're well covered in the reviews, and yes, there's tribalism, and some people will tell you that certain brands never break down and these ones are always unreliable and all those. We'll test all that. But the reality is, at this stage, you're selecting a car that can tow the van that you want it to tow with sufficient payload, and you will know if that means that you require some minor or even some major modifications, and you'll just have to choose. You'll just have to choose which of those brands suit you, provided it can tow the van that you want it to tow and it can go to the places that you want to go. I think the bigger question here isn't now choosing the 4 or 5 vans or the 1 or 2 cars that work for you within your budget range. I think you can get down to that list now with the considerations that we've put in place. The issue now is that most people sort of say, right, how do I now stress test, or how do I check that I've made the right decision? So it meets all the criteria. On paper it seems to work. I like the feel of the options, but how can I give myself the certainty that there's not something out there that I don't know about? And there's things like websites and reviews. Now, you saw in the episode 1 of this series, I actually made the point that not all of those reviews are unbiased or independent. It doesn't mean that it's not a useful review. You might still get a bit of an overall confirmation about the things that you felt about that car. Sometimes people just have a bent about particular brands. And oh my God, I'm a Land Rover driver at the moment, and you know that I'm not brand tribal, but there are some people that just absolutely have a hate on for Land Rovers, and there are some Land Rover drivers that have a hate on for Land Cruisers, and there are patrol drivers that have a hate on for Land Cruisers, and there are Land Cruiser drivers that have a hate on for patrols, right? So you just got to sift through that. If they're going to bias that way, just take that into account. One of the more useful forums are user forums. All right, so whether they're on Facebook in particular, let's use the case of a Defender, all right? And the same applies for, say, a Land Cruiser 300 or a Patrol. Go and join the Facebook forum, and particularly the Australian user groups for those cars. In the first instance, can I actually say, do a search on things like weights, towing, right, through the forum, and you'll get lots and lots of threads and lots of comments, right, from people. You can even put in like issues, or if you've heard that there's an issue, say, the amount of oil that might get burnt in a 300, or if you've heard a particular issue about a Land Rover or a Patrol, do a search on it. So before you bother everybody on the forum and ask them a question that's probably been asked time and time again, go to the little search, the little spotlight search, and search that forum and read through the various trails and see whether that helps. And remember, these forums are mostly people who actively use those cars, and they'll have a bias towards those cars or that rig or that van if you're looking at a user forum for a van. Accept that, but they've also got a lot of experience, and there's a lot of shared experiences. That one thing I do see on some of those forums is that some people come on quite innocently and they sort of poke at an issue. So, we've heard that these engines blow up because they run out of oil, Now, you're going to get a lot of pushback because most of the people haven't experienced that at all. Or, how do you answer the fact that some people say that your cars are unreliable or that they're junk? Well, if that's your view, and if you're even thinking in that space, don't go onto those user forums. You've already got a disposition against that particular van or that particular car. A better way, check the issues first using the search functionality, but ask a particular question. So, thanks for letting me join. I'm looking at buying a Defender 350 7-seater. I know that there's axle limitations. I'm thinking about pairing it with in our case, a Zone RV 18-foot 6-inch base. My tow ball weight loaded, I think, is going to be around such and such. Is there anybody else who has that rig? Can you share your experiences? Are there any things that I should watch out for? Does it work, not work? But any tips would be welcome. Oh, and by the way, if anybody has weighed fully loaded and all that, and is willing to share, do you mind sharing your weight reports? I think if you ask questions like that, any tips on certain products, ask those sorts of specific questions, and you'll get people who have tried or not tried, or there'll be some reason why something can or can't be done, and they might even make some recommendations for you. The other place that a lot of people will go, they'll go to the Lemon car sites or the Lemon caravan site. So I'm not going to say don't do that, right? Because they'll give you a bit of a feel if there's a common problem with a particular brand or model of van. But what I see are two mistakes when people use that. First of all, just remember that is a pool of unhappy people. They're probably quite legitimate individual issues, but they might not necessarily be representative, right, of a brand or a van. Okay, so just keep that in mind. No reason not to use it, no reason not to understand the experience that people have had, particularly if there's a recurring theme about trying to get warranty or dealerships not helping and those sorts of things. So use the information wisely, but just remember that 99.9% of people on those sites are unhappy they've got a problem, but the fact that that person's got a problem doesn't mean that 95% of other people have had that same problem. Okay, and I'd much rather people had a look at those sorts of things before they bought a van, before they bought their rig, than to find out that there was a problem afterwards. And remember, at this stage, this is the time that you've got to start to think about what modifications you might be putting on either the car or the van, what options you're going to put on, so that when you're shortlisting, you're doing this final shortlist because you're almost there, that you're actually comparing apples with apples. Different vans have different standard things. Just make sure that you've taken this into account, know what modifications you are going to put on your car, know what modifications you might want to put on different vans. So in our case, we wanted to minimise the amount of modifications. We pretty much guessed that we were going to put a bull bar on. We didn't have too many options. You can go back and have a look in our series about our discussion on that at the time. There's lots of reasons not to have a bull bar. Pedestrian safety in and around town, weight, cost. If you're only occasionally going to be going into regional and remote areas, then you've really got to question the value proposition of putting a bull bar on. We took the view that we were about to do some significant legs in very remote areas. We picked the one that protected the most vital elements of the front of the car, just simply because the risk of an animal strike was going to increase with the sheer distance and the sorts of places that we were going to go. We did put a winch on, and for most people I don't think they need a winch. So if you're finely balanced on weight and finely balanced on cost, and unless you're going to be doing the most rugged off-road 4x4ing, and that probably won't be with your van, you probably don't need a winch. We did have to think about wheels and tyres in our case. The Defender came standard with 20-inch wheels, and some people have travelled well on their 20-inch wheels, and they're more likely to have changed to a more rugged all-terrain light truck tyre to make the tyre more robust. We took the view that we were going to be doing some more soft stuff, some more corrugated stuff, and on balance it was better to go down to an 18-inch, so that was an aftermarket modification. And that's been great. Some models of cars more recently have come out with, say, the 19-inch wheel option, and there are some people who've probably made the understandable mistake of thinking that 19-inch is at least better than 20-inch from a wheel profile perspective. I just caution you that the availability, the experience certainly in those models, and talking to our tyre guy, people who have 19-inch wheels, they've had real limitations in the availability of 19-inch tyres. If you've got a choice between a 20-inch and a 19-inch, for example, then 20-inch with a decent set of tyres is going to give you a lot more options than 19-inch. I just wouldn't recommend a 22-inch wheel and tyre for if you're going to be doing any significant off-roading. Make sure that you've got a tyre pressure monitoring system for both your van and your car. The other thing that we thought was essential was some essential extra protection, and in our case the Zone caravans have a lot of underbody protection, but we did choose to put some extra protection in front of the suspension, and the running gear, because that does cop a bit of a pounding, and we thought a stone stomper, or another aftermarket stone guard was pretty essential, because the last thing we wanted to do was have a stone flick off and ricochet off the van back into the back of the car and shatter the rear window, and it does happen. And basic recovery gear. max tracks, and at least some basic ropes and bridle, and ideally some soft shackles. Doesn't have to have a comprehensive recovery kit, even just a very basic one, but just make it good quality. A couple of other quick mods or accessories or options that might be worth thinking about. If we had our time over, we probably would have put PPF on the windows just to stop some of the scratching. We're going for a narrower van now anyway, but we may still do that. On the car, we put a raised air intake. That was just to stop extra dust getting in through the dust filter. We carried an extra dust filter with us anyway. If you think you're going to be fording a little bit more, make sure that that's a snorkel, not a raised air intake. And we just did not need to use more than the maximum wading depth of 900 millimeters for the Defender, which is actually quite good comparative to other out-of-the-box cars. If you are worried about where your diff breathers are, and in some cars it's just on top of the diff, then consider a diff breather as a relatively inexpensive insurance if you think that you're going to be doing watercross. A lot of people do get concerned about fuel quality while they're out there. Some people want to put a pre-filter in. We didn't. Okay, give us your thoughts down in the comments. So make sure that when you finally spec your van and you're making your final choices, that you know and can compare as close as you possibly can, right, to the same battery, the same solar, the same other inclusions. Sometimes they won't offer that option, and that's just a choice that you've got to make. And in particular, get a very clear understanding of what does that mean for price, but what does that mean for delivered and loaded weights. And we have seen cases where some manufacturers will only say they're within plus or minus 5% of weights, starting weights, and not that precise once you've put extra modifications in. And that means that some people become very disappointed because the actual delivered weight in a lot of reported cases is well over what people are expecting, and plus or minus 5% isn't good enough. Right, and there are a number of manufacturers who've become much better with their calculators in giving you a much better understanding of what the actual delivered weight's going to be. And go to the user forums and actually find out from people what their experience was, how close were their delivered weights for those options to what was promised. Wow, it's a lot to get through. Remember, if it's useful, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and we really would value your contribution and your tips down in the comments. Okay, maybe you need a coffee break. G'day, welcome back. The next R, risk. We're all doing this because we want to have a fun time and a great time. We don't want to put a dampener on everything. If you think about these things and prepare in advance, in the unlikely case that something goes wrong, okay, you've at least thought about it, you're prepared, you're equipped. Health and medical needs, first aid and emergency responses, communications, insurance. I think one of the ones which traps a lot of people is their roadside assistance and their recovery plan. On a long trip, income and savings. Have you actually got either deep enough pockets or a plan to make some extra money so that you can complete the lap? Very quickly, health and medical. Our best tip is actually make sure that you go and have checkups, make sure that your health is as up to date and as healthy as you can be, including dental, before you go off on your long trips. Going to be much harder in some of the areas you go to get access to GPs and to dentists and those sorts of things. Make sure that you've got enough of your pharmaceuticals or your medicines with you, or you know where you can get to them. Most of you will actually be relatively close to the blacktop for most of the locations you're going. Well, don't assume that there are lots of pharmacies in a lot of remote areas, and don't assume that every pharmacy has the stuff that you need. First aid and emergency. All right, so you might consider your currency on first aid. Make sure that you've got decent first aid kits, so your small hiking kits and even your small car kit may not be satisfactory if you're out in remote areas. Contemplate your snake bite kits, and a decent medical kit. Things like the Emergency Plus app, right, and that will actually work over the internet. Great resource, and so is things like Health Direct. right? So Health Direct will actually help you find where facilities are a reputable first aid app to remind you. And remember, for emergency, it's 000, and you can use the Emergency Plus app. And for things short of an emergency or very serious, know how to access the RFDS system. And on that point, 100% of our YouTube advertising revenue goes to charity, including RFDS. Now, some of this depends on whether you've got communications, of course. Communications, we've covered it many times in the series. Go back and have a look. Not everyone's going to have UHF, particularly in a case of emergency, but it does actually make for a safer operating environment. Of course, you'll have your mobile phone, but we actually know that not everywhere has good mobile phone coverage. The expansion in Starlink and the advent of Starlink Mini means that more people will be relying on Starlink while they're out there. We also had a Garmin locator beacon, and there are other options for that as well. It actually gave us the ability to send a few texts as well via satellite so that we could stay in contact when we were off grid. We pretty much have communications just about wherever we go in one form or another. On the roadside assistance though, this is something which we nearly got caught out on when we broke down, where the roadside assistance package was taking care of the car, including an extensive recovery, but it wasn't going to cover the van to the same extent, right? And when we checked our RACQ coverage, which we thought was the ultimate and the top, and it was when we took it out, it was only going to get us between 100 and 200 kilometres with the van. So we faced the risk that the van and the car were going to be separated for an extended period of time. Fortunately, we ended up in Exmouth. Fortunately, we worked our way through all that. But in the process, we upgraded to a new package that RACQ had, and some of the other auto clubs have a similar top package. So all I would say to you is go and check the fine print of your roadside assistance for your car and for your van, particularly if they're different, and make sure that it's going to recover you, your car and your van, ideally to the same location, or worst case, if there's a prolonged problem with your car, that might be a breakdown, might be an accident, that it will get your van and you all the way home. So just check out the fine print and make sure that you're covered, because, you know, from the tip of Cape York to Cairns, that's over 1,000 kilometres, right? And there's an awful lot of people who are just going to get dropped at one of the smaller towns somewhere in between for a prolonged period of time without the ability to get further home unless they have one of the top cover packages. Is your rig insured, right? And is it insured to go to the places that you want to go and do the things that you want to do? So make sure you understand the fine print. Make sure that your insurance covers your modifications. If your modifications need to be notified, you check that out with your insurer. And also think about travel insurance. Income and savings, I won't dwell on it. It's pretty self-explanatory. It is just a risk to the fulfillment of your dream if your savings are going to run out and you've overestimated what your income might be. So just have that thought process or that plan in place. That's just going to depend on individual circumstances. So that's it on risk. Just make sure that you've got a plan for all of those sorts of things before you set out. Hey, g'day.
G'day, g'day.
Almost all the way through it. So we'll finish off with the sixth of the R's, which I've called routine, but it's really about those things which just makes living on the road extra worry-free. It's not about, you know, all the comfort stores. These are some other things that you can put in place just so that you can get onto the road and enjoy making sure that your house back at home is looked after. We had someone who came in and house sitted. It was one of our daughters, so family moves in. Other people get their houses rented out and managed. That will all depend on how long you're going away. So make sure you've got some plans in place for that. Mail, right? So if someone is house sitting for you, they can obviously collect some mail. On the road, you'll want some mail forwarded to you. You want some parcels to come to you. So set yourself up an Australia Post My Post account, and you can actually change what your home post office is and get things sent forward, and then you can collect it on the way through. Really, really easy.
Yeah, we used that a couple of times. For your essential bills, try and set up a direct debit or an auto pay facility, or get your bills sent to your email box so that you don't miss them And these are things like your rego, your rate, insurance, stuff like that.
And so that the rig stays insured and the rig stays registered.
Yes, very important.
That's just pretty important when you're on the road.
Something we found really handy was to make sure you have some cash on you. Not a lot. Some places will only take cash, and of course it's handy to have coinage so that if you're using washing machines, you just don't have to worry about it. You've got your coins there without hassling someone for change.
Sometimes there's donation camps, sometimes they'll only take cash. And in the really remote areas, sometimes the FPOS is not working, so if you want to fill up with fuel, sometimes it might actually be handy to have a little bit of cash. Be careful about your security. We generally had
between 1 and 200 at any time.
I think you used to just go to the bank when we could and just get a roll of coins, didn't you? You know, a bag of coins. We didn't travel with pets, but for those who are travelling with pets, obviously make sure you've got things like vet arrangements and all those sorts of things. You'll know better than us. But just remember, you can't take your pets into national parks. So that just means that some of the camping options might not be available to you, and you may have to day trip in and out. I think one of the things which will give you a lot of peace of mind, particularly for the noobs, is that when you've got your new rig, make sure you go and get it weighed straight away, just so you actually know that your weights are right, or if you've got to adjust or move some things around, you've got to sacrifice a little bit of gear, and go and do a shakeout. And and we mean everything. So try some van parks, try the power, try off-grid, go to some different places, try a couple of different terrains if you can, and ideally within the early service interval for your van, so that if anything needs to be fixed, you can fix it, and also just so you get used to how to live in the van before you head out into the wilderness. Oh, clothing. So you don't need to take a lot of clothing with you. You might be tempted to, but you don't. Fairly casual. Yeah, you won't use half of what you take, and just wear layers and those sorts of things. You will need a decent pullover, but we use merino and those sorts of things, and layers. The place is pretty casual. Rubbish points are not that common around the place, and you'll actually find that some of the highway stops and that sort of stuff, the rubbish bins are full. So good idea when you go shopping, and try to remove any of the non-essential packaging if you can there. Get rid of it, because you might actually have some difficulty, carrying some rubbish in some locations. Try to minimise bottles, glass, and those sorts of things. The soda stream was really good. To save having to buy soft drinks and all those sorts of things, we live with the soda stream, and when you water the soda stream down with some Bundy rum and some gin and all those sorts of things, it's even better. Particularly for the people who've been around for a while, if you've got your own tips, comments, questions, put them down in the comments and we'll try to address them. And of course, everybody else who's watching the video, go and have a look at the comments. There's some really good tips. Okay, so that wraps it up. Across 3 videos, we've covered a lot. Yeah, and we hope that you found that helpful and it's provided you some structure for your next big adventure. Remember, if you have liked this, or you know someone who's likely to be travelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, share the video. And remember, 100% of our YouTube advertising revenue goes to charity, so all this helps send some money off to Legacy and RFDS. Yep. So on that note, thank you. Happy rig selection. Happy travels. Happy travels, everyone. Again, thanks for joining us. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and remember, 100% of our YouTube advertising revenue goes to charity.